Hello and welcome to the third episode of True to Form this series, and what an episode we've got for you on this bumper edition. We'll be talking to Andrew Blair-White for his Cheltenham Festival fancies and also some for the River Don this weekend. We're going through your fancies at 10 to 1 or above for the Cheltenham Festival, reviewing them, seeing what we think about them, and it's Cheltenham Trials Day this weekend. Two fancies from myself at big prices for Prestbury Park. This is True to Form. The first part of the show is from the audience, and this week is a little bit special. We've been asking for your 10 to 1 or above Cheltenham Festival fancies on both Twitter and TikTok. We collated a good 10 of them to review, and I'll be bringing in Andrew Blair-White later in the show to review his favourite and maybe the one he's least favourite on of all the fancies. I'm going to be going through them here as well and just giving my honest opinions on all of them. Hopefully you agree or probably disagree with what I'm about to say. We'll start from the top then. Live Conti for the County Hurdle. This came from James Burgess. He said, Live Conti in the County Hurdle, great run from the back at the weekend. Will be bang there in the county. I think for this horse, he's interesting. Obviously, Grade 1 place last year. For me, I can't quite see it. Dan Skelton had in mind that Fortune to Mare was going to be the County Hurdle horse this season. And off a mark of 142, is Live Conti going to be having bags in hand, well handicapped? I'm not too sure. I think he maybe has got a slightly inflated mark on what he's done so far in front of our eyes. So he may have a chance, and I think he's a good horse, but Live Conti for the County Hurdle, I just can't quite see it myself, but he is definitely full of ability. Maybe one that just at a slightly lower mark could be going in. The next one, Golden Ace in the Champion Hurdle. Wouldn't expect her to be out of the first three, and 14s and 16s at the moment. That was from Richard Hogan on Twitter. It comes down to a case in the Champion Hurdle of who runs. If you've got Sergino who's going to be running and the New Line's going to be running, Touchwood, everything goes okay for them. I suppose the likes of Bryce Days Ahead could be in there as well. Lossymouth might go. I actually think she's got a better chance of going to the Mare's Hurdle, to be honest. And then you've got Constitution Hill. Is he going to turn up? Is he going to go after his Southall run if he does go to Southall? I think you're betting her to hope she places rather than hope she wins. And that may be harsh talking about a fighting fifth winner and last year's Champion Hurdle winner, because probably people thought the same of her going into last year. But I think it's going to be a case of the New Lion has to disappoint and Sergino has to disappoint massively, and then you even got a chance of winning, not that you're certainty to win. So for me, I think it's probably just the wrong price to be betting on her for the race itself. Captain Guinness of the Champion Chase. Here's a big one. This is from Declan Carroll, who is on the Take a Pool podcast. Captain Guinness. Everyone keeps laughing, but he's proven the last 3 years he has the attributes for a very specialist race, and he's 100 to 1. Now, I know Declan's a big fan of Captain Guinness, has been a big fan of him for a while. Don't want to be too negative here, but he is 11. He hasn't maybe shown the best form in recent runs, and while he does save his absolute best with Cheltenham, he really does. You can almost forgive him for the rest of the year. He turns up for one race and that's a Champion Chase. He's getting on now, and I think 100 to 1, as much as it is a huge price and you can't exactly have too much of a disagreement with that, I'd be happy to leave him myself. But look, best of luck to Deck on that one. He must have a good chance if he fancies him. Yeah Man for the Thames. Now this is a very interesting one actually from the Gavin Cromwell yard. Yeah Man in the Thames, 25 to 1, rated 143 as a chaser, given a rating of 133 for a 2-mile 3 furlong race at Doncaster on Friday, which is way short of his optimum trip. £10 well in on his chasing mark, and Cromwell's well capable of plotting one towards a nice handicap at the festival. Yeah, I can see the case with this really. It'd be interesting to see what the price is of him and how his maybe price contracts now he's got a British mark, because it is 25 to 1. But he's a horse who I think he's getting on a bit, but he's shown this season that he's still in pretty decent form. You're on a nice race sort of towards the start of the season over fences, then over hurdles, you're just staying on, eye-catcher run at Leopardstown in a Thames qualifier that has produced 3 of the last 10 winners of the Thames, not since they've brought in the new rules of 4 only qualify rather than 6, but I think that's a bit notable. Just for me, like, how many chasers come back from fences and actually perform to a very high level over hurdles? There isn't too many. I couldn't name too many now. They usually have that inflated run over fences because they are a better horse over fences. So yeah, man, I can see the case, and he's a big price, so you can't be absolutely negative at that, but I don't know, just the whole chasing back to hurdling maybe slightly interesting. Another one for Dan Skelton here, be a bit interesting horse because he's running at Trials Day on Saturday. Maestro Conti at 10 to 1 for the Triumph. Also a rogue shout for if Kopeck de Boers and Lambert go too hard from the front in the Arkle. Mambo number 5 at 20 to 1 for the Arkle could pick them off, and that's from Zach Ruston. Look, I think a lot will depend on Maestro Conti this weekend. However, I think he's one of the better British chances we've got in the Triumph Hurdle. I thought he was very good last time out. He's obviously got the relation to Live Conti, and it's a nice family. Yeah, I think he's got a chance. He's from Royal Kempton, good engine. Mambo number 5 for me. I'd like to see him go to the Game Spirit and then to the Jack Richards. I've said this on True to Form before, but He's not going to do that. He's going to go probably to the Kingmaker and then go on to the Arkle. He'd have a fine chance. I just don't think he's maybe got the ability to win an Arkle, but he's not the worst 20 spoke I've seen in my life. I think he's got a very fine chance, and he's a good horse. I just think he'll be a better horse stepping up in trip probably next season. One from Patrick Donnelly on TikTok now, and it's very simple. Ballyfad for the Turners Novice Hurdle, 25-1. Now, I think this is something that Andrew Blair might have a bit of opinion on, but for myself, look, I watched back his debut run just to see if he was as good as what he saw in front of our eyes, and I watched it back last night. He had a nice cruising speed. He got one down, he got one away from the stands on the first circuit a little bit wrong. Apart from that, he pinged them down the back straight. He can go to his right a little bit. However, from what we saw, there's not too many negatives, I don't think. And I think it'll be interesting to see which Gordon Elliott horses go to relevant novice hurdles. You know, you've got the Scarlet Hustle, the Lazada Star, the El Carrios is probably going to go to the Supreme. But Ballyfad at 25s, I suppose it depends what he does at the DRF in the 2 mile grade 1, but it's not the worst shouts in the world. It's probably one of my more favourite ones on the list, to be honest, because he's a horse who's got so much potential. I actually could see him, you know, fulfilling that potentially. So definitely got a nice chance. La Conquière for the Mares Novice Hurdle at 16-1. That Mares race has a funny way of throwing up an upset. Lucia, Price Days Ahead, 6.5. All those favourites were beaten. That's from George, 99999. Is that your Christian name? Yeah, look, I wasn't maybe sold on her after her Ascot run this weekend. She didn't go past O'Betty, and O'Betty's a lovely horse, but still raced in the low 130s. As much as that was her first run in open company, and she'd have to sort of potentially, you know, it's a learning curve and a bit more experience for her. I think that she has a little way to go to potentially get to that level of Bambino Fever and Outlaw School, who's recently just been bought by, Old School Outlaw, who's just recently been bought by JP McManus. So 16-1, you can't be too negative, but I think she might just lack that small bit of ability in what could be quite a nice Mares Novice Hurdle this season. Weighed out for the National Hunt Chase, absolute certainty for the National Hunt Chase, according to Ben Bourgoin on TikTok. Sorry, Weighed Out, and sorry, Weighed Out fans. But look, I think he's a horse I actually put up as a novice hurdler to follow last year, but he is potentially one of the more slower horses I've seen in quite a while. I think if you asked Ollie Murphy that, he'd probably agree. I think he has said something very similar at the Cheltenham November meeting after he won. I actually like to see a match race between him and Chantry House in their prime and see who's the speedier horse. I just think he's a horse you're taking a bit of a chance on, and quite a bit of a chance on for a horse race at 145. He's going to be towards the top of the weights in the National Hunt Chase. The National Hunt Chase, since it's become a handicap, does tend to suit those horses who are slightly towards the top end of the handicap. However, I'm not too sure on him, and to be honest, I wouldn't be too keen on him. I'd find it very hard to back him, and so yeah, good luck. He's not a certainty though. I don't think anyone can say he's a certainty, and even if you do fancy him, you wouldn't be saying that. And I don't think he's even a bet in my eyes. But look, good luck. Weighed Out wouldn't be for me. The final two, and they're going to sort of put into one here because lots of people mention these two horses. I don't have a specific tweet to bring out, but Haiti Colors and Grey Dawning for the Gold Cup were mentioned multiple times. I prefer Grey Dawning, being perfectly honest. Haiti Colors is a lovely horse. I liked what he did in the Welsh National, but I don't think he's going to get the same way out in front. I think it's going to be a lot stiffer task. Obviously, they're going to Ireland, I think, as a prep run for the Gold Cup, just so the extra space between that and the Gold Cup rather than the Cotswold Chase. I just don't think he'll have the same ability. Grey Dawning could well do. He's a winner around the track. He's won at the festival before. He's been plotted towards the race. Dan Scales is a master trainer, plotting his horses towards big races. I prefer Grey Dawning myself. I think it's quite an open year for the Gold Cup, and I actually think Grey Dawning's been slightly overlooked at 10-1 or 12-1. I think he's been slightly forgotten about because he didn't run at Christmas, but I prefer Grey Dawning over Haiti Colors. But those are your fancies for the Cheltenham Festival. I'm pleased to be joined by the Denman to my what a friend, Andrew Blair-White. Andrew, I'd love to get into pleasantries, but we'll just get straight into it. You've heard what we've been talking about with the Twitter fancies for Cheltenham. Who's one that you're quite excited by and the one that you sort of agreed with the most?
Yeah, I suppose I quite like Porrick's idea there on Ballyfad for the Turners, a horse that I have a lot of time for. He was very impressive at Leopardstown at Christmas time. Probably showed a little bit more speed than I was expecting as well, considering in his bumpers, you know, he took a while to get wound up, but he showed a lot of pace off the bend there. He goes back to the Dublin Racing Festival for the 2 mile grade 1. I suppose that's the one thing in your mind in regards to backing him for the Turners is he's going to run in a grade 1 over 2 miles at Leopardstown. But they do have El Kairos in that division, and they don't necessarily have a standard setter in the 2.5 mile division. So it's certainly one that I can see. And if you look at the Betfair exchanges, he looks a little bit harder for the Turners rather than the Supreme. I'd
say Ballyfad's probably the one for me as well. And then we don't want to sort of diminish on opinions here. It's a game of opinions, but of all the ones that have come in, maybe what's the one that you're a bit windy on?
Well, I was intrigued by somebody mentioning that Wade Out was a certainty for the National Hunt Chase. Look, I can understand the idea of putting cheek pieces on him, which I'm sure they will do, and I'm sure he's a decent enough handicapped horse, but he's a little bit of a monkey at the same time. And I could just see him doing actually very similar to what Resplendent Grey did in the race last year, where he almost gets himself out of his ground. He might plug on into 4th or 5th, so if he's at that kind of wild each way price, you can understand people backing it. But I just think he doesn't help himself. And we saw it even at the November meeting. He gets himself out of the race before getting back into the race, and you can't afford to do that at Cheltenham.
We have got separate notes for this, but I agree with him on Wade Out here as well for National Hunt Chase. Yourself then, I'm going to put one forward as well, but 10 to 1 or above for the Cheltenham Festival. What's the horse you'd like to highlight to the True to Form viewers?
Well, as we mentioned the National Hunt Chase, I don't think it's a particularly strong-looking race on paper at the moment. I don't think the market's taken much shape, and I'm not sure there's plenty of horses that we know their destinations. One that we do know the destination of, if it comes up anyway decent ground, is Iceberg Theory for Paul Nolan. He's currently around 20-25 to 1 for the race. He's only ran the 3 times over fences, so he was second at Wexford behind Majestic Force, then won at Limerick beating Boston Rover, and then won at Cork in a pretty decent handicap chase, beating O'Toole, who was a good horse for the Crawfords in his day. So I think there's an awful lot to like about that. He's unexposed over staying trips, and they did the classic. They put the rod out for a handicap fishing last week at Ascot. He got a mark of 133 in Britain. I think he's 129 in Ireland, so kind of the statutory kind of £4 rise. But 133 will get him a nice racing weight. I think they'll run him again. I think they might even run him again this weekend. But I think they'll all have eyes on March. I think the only caveat with it, from speaking to kind of people closer to the yard, is he doesn't necessarily want it kind of knee deep. So therefore, you'd want to see a slightly nicer type of ground. But as long as it's not kind of heavy, I think he's got an awful lot of ability, and I think he's very much untapped over that staying distance.
Nice price as well for the National Hunt Chase in a sort of fairly open market. One that you'll potentially like, Dr. Steinberg, would be the one for me. I was actually messaging Andrew last night while I was still rooting away in the office there, and I thought, just looking at the Albert Bartlett market, there's a couple there that aren't going to go. No John this end's quite prominent in the market. I thought Dr. Steinberg's the one that's probably the most likely of the William Owens horses to go, and I thought the way he won at Navan last time, beating a horse that you like, the Devil You Know, I thought it was very impressive. The way he went away from the last hurdle was quite good, and the way he travelled into it as well would be nice. Nathaniel Lacey looks to be next for the DRF. I hope Danny Mullins will be riding him, so I imagine Paul Townend will be on Dr. Dumanil, and I thought Dr. Steinberg at 16s wasn't a bad price for the Albert Bartlett, so he'd be the one for me. But I know a horse that Andrew likes even more, Le de Sud for the Champion Chase at 8 to 1 is one that I am slowly becoming quite keen on in the Champion Chase. I'm not even going to go to him for comment on that, because I know what the comment would be. Very finally, looking sort of ahead really, or backwards actually, performance that you've really enjoyed over the last 7 days, and then we've got Cheltenham Trials Day this weekend. Anything from Cheltenham or the surrounding meetings that you may like for this weekend?
Yeah, well, going back to last week, hard to get away from Old Park Star. Absolutely fantastic in the Rossington Main. Not telling anything that the viewers don't already know there. He looks to have a fantastic chance now in the Supreme Novices. Just at a lower level, I was really impressed by Throatlash for Donald McCain and Brian Hughes. Big old horse, over 17 hands. Was a pretty ordinary maiden hurdler last year, but it's 3 from 3 over fences this season. Seems to have turned over a new leaf. Between 2 miles and 2.5 miles. Wouldn't surprise me if he's a horse that turns up at Aintree at the back end of the season. Won there at Boxing Day over 2 miles, and I think he's got a nice kind of profile about him. Jumps really well as well. And then looking forward to this weekend, Trials Day looks absolutely class. Looks stacked full. 8 races, proper racing on. I always love the Doncaster meeting on the same day, and the River Don Novice Hurdle looks a good race. Carlin Rigg is your favourite, but I really like Ruth Jefferson's Country Code. Ruth won this race a couple of years ago with Kerry Hill, who unfortunately is no longer with us. This horse is a really nice horse. Won at Newcastle, won then under a penalty as well. He's won 2 from 2 in his novice hurdles. Looks like he stays all day. And Ruth, one of these trainers that doesn't necessarily have too many horses on her books, but every year she manages to overperform with what she has. And I do think that Country Code might be the next horse that takes her to the top. Wouldn't be a surprise to me if he goes very close in the River Don and maybe turns up in the Sefton at Aintree at the back end of the season.
We heard cries of Root over in Australia recently for the Ashes. We've now got cries of Roof at Doncaster this weekend. Thank you very much to Andrew Blair-White for coming in. Always good to hear from Andrew. And he didn't mention a Paul Nolan horse there. I mean, that surprised me. We move on to names to note now, and just a couple for me to mention. The obvious one is Old Park Star. I just want to mention him in the whole context of the Supreme. He was very good at Haydock. The way he went away from his last two hurdles and just sprinted clear was so impressive. But you don't need me to tell you that. Just the Supreme in general, we could be having quite a nice race here with him, El Carrios, even Mighty Parker looked very impressive. Idaho's Sun, My Daddy Paddy's not completely out of it. This could be quite a vintage year. And I saw a tweet coming into this that suggests that most good Supremes tend to be ones that have Nicky Henderson horses that are well regarded going into the race, the likes of the Altior year, the Constitution Hill and John Bon year. It's probably quite correct. And I think this year is going to be much the same, really. Just Old Park Star looks very, very good. He sets the standard in my eyes. El Carrios is going to go to the main hurdle after Dublin Racing Festival, see what he does, but he won't achieve the same amount coming into the Cheltenham Festival as Old Park Star. Very impressive. And just two more I want to mention. Scorpio Rising and Top Jimmy were 1-2 in a Windsor race earlier this weekend. I thought it was a good race, to be honest, but I thought the front two were really much the best. Top Jimmy's travelled away nicely and sort of had the field on the stretch a little bit at Windsor, but it was a very good performance from Scorpio Rising to get back up and get past Ronnie Murphy. He's a bit of an unexposed horse now in handicaps. He could definitely be improving going up through the ranks, and I think actually stepping up to 3 miles will really suit Scorpio Rising going forwards. And Top Jimmy's just a nice horse. He'll be winning races this season. And just a little bit of form-wise, Lisbon Park was in third for Joe Tizard. That has Old Park Star form, so I think the front two pulling away from him quite comfortably was very notable. So those are my names to note. Now we move on to eye catchers. Eye catchers time now, and it's just the one. I actually think this is quite a special one because it's the first time a horse is appearing in 2 different sections of True to Form. And we're only on episode 3. Lazare de Star. Well done to Lazare de Star for making it into this section again. But look, he was a good piece of form. He ran at Navan on the weekend. He went off odds on, and I thought he was going to win, and he probably travelled away that he was going to win after the second last. I think Jack Kennedy thought he was going to win. I just think he got to the front too soon. He landed in front. Jack Kennedy went, what happens? And he got beat. But he got beat by, I think, a nice horse in Zeus Power of Joseph O'Brien's. I think it's just going to be a good form race to follow form-wise. We'll only have De One was in third. That has a decent amount of form coming from Ireland. Actually came over to England to try and run against No Drama this end, but disappointed. But I think the front 3 are all going to be rated high 120s, low 130s, potentially going forwards. And maybe they won't be grade 1 horse. I did think Lazare Star was potentially a grade 1 horse at one point this season. Maybe he won't be that, but I think he will be well handicapped if he steps back up to 2.5 miles, because that was a 2-mile run on the weekend. And he just got lost a little bit in front, getting to the front too soon, but he's got plenty of boot, and I think he will stay back to his 2.5 miles. So Lazare Star is an eye catcher, but I just think in general, that piece of form from Navan on the weekend is definitely a race to follow. Now let's proceed with caution time. Now we did do this in episode 1 of True to Form, and I put up Confusion, who was actually beaten on the weekend, so don't also have an amazing track record, but the form is there. And this week I want to put forward Maya Town. Now it's actually a horse I backed this weekend. I just think he's becoming a slightly hard horse to follow. Yes, he was very impressive in the Ultimate. He probably will head back to the Ultimate this season, but he looks like a hothead of a horse. He was a hothead of a horse in the Ultimate. He's now obviously, massively inflated rating from his Ultimate win, and while he could still be well handicapped, and connection we're talking about him as a Gold Cup horse, I think that slightly comes into what his price is on the day, and he makes mistakes, and I just think it's going to be very difficult to claim he's a well-handicapped horse based on winning an Ultima in the high 120s. So just with a view to the future, I think Maya Town, as much as he could be winning races this season, I will not write that off the table at all. I think he's just potentially getting a slight inflation on what he's actually done. And if he did turn up to the Ultima, I think it would be hard to back him on what his handicap mark is currently. So Maya Town, just one to be very cautious of going forwards in these spring festivals. And finally, a look ahead, and it's Cheltenham Trials Day. I'm really looking forward to it. I'll be on track this weekend, so hopefully we can find a couple of nice fancies. So hopefully there's some nice stories that can pick up from the Cheltenham Festival going forward. For me, I want to mention 2, and it's actually in the first race and towards the end of the card as well. The first horse is Push the Button. Now, very interesting horse this. I think he's actually a horse who could step up to 3 miles in time, and I actually don't think he's an outsider at all for the Ultima. I think he's something like 25 to 1, 33 to 1 for the Ultima in March. Wouldn't put anyone off that, but He's a horse who has plenty of boot. I thought he did really nicely to win on his chasing debut for Mark Walford. Very good, just went away from the race and won quite nicely. He's a horse then ran behind Steel Alley at Ascot. That was over, I think, 2.5 miles again, and he ran a nice race, but I just don't think that maybe the race suits, and I don't think he's ultimately going to be a horse who's going to be bolting up in greater races. But looking at some quotes from Mark Walford that Jake Price did actually on the Racing TV Jumps Network, he was saying this could be a nice stepping stone to something like the Reynoldstown. So I think if Mark Walford thinks he's that ability, he must be going well off 137 this weekend. I think 2.5 miles, Cheltenham, it's going to really suit him. He's a horse I've really warmed to this season. I think that definitely Push the Button at 8-1 for this weekend has got some attractiveness to it, and I'll be backing him this weekend. And then one more, it's actually a horse that I think Andrew Blair-White would have been quite interested by. The Devil You Know is entered at Cheltenham. He's 20-1 for the Grade 1 Novice Hurdle at Cheltenham this weekend. I think objectively that's just the wrong price. He has entries elsewhere. I think he could go to the Nathaniel Lacey at the Dublin Racing Festival. He has an entry for the River Don. I don't think that's a likely target. I think it's either Cheltenham this weekend or Nathaniel Lacey. I think if connections look at it, I think this weekend's the more likely option, to be honest. And he has great form. He beat Scarlet Hustle earlier this season, beat him quite nicely, stayed on well through the line, finished second to Dr. Steinberg, who's a horse who I fancy for the Bartlett. Nice bit of form there from Navan. And he's done nothing wrong to suggest that in a race like this, it was wide open this weekend, he should be 20-1. I appreciate he's bigger than what he should be because we don't know if he's definitely going to the race. And ultimately, if he does get declared, I could definitely see him being a 10-1, 8-1 shot. But even so, if he's 10-1 after declarations, I wouldn't be putting anyone off him. Yes, Active Innocence will be the hype horse. Yes, Taurus Bay will be a nice horse as well, a nice hype horse with Ben Pauling. And those two horses have lots going for them. I like both horses. However, the Devil You Know is also a horse I like. He's shown graded form already, I think, and he has to have a chance, surely. So for me, I think the Devil You Know is too big of a price at Cheltenham this weekend. And that's it for a look ahead, and that's it for True to Form episode 3. Thank you very much again to Andrew Blair-White for coming on, and thank you very much to you at home for putting your comments in for the Cheltenham Festival. If you'd like to get involved in these videos again, make sure to comment in the YouTube description below, or on Twitter, or on my TikTok page. Find me wherever, and I'll find your comments to get into True to Form. We'll be back next week to discuss more things Cheltenham Festival, and most likely reviewing Cheltenham Trials Day. This has been True to Form.
Watch live racing now on racingtv.com.